All right. How y'all doing, everyone? My name is Patrick Dunnigan. I am the director, one of the directors of Kentucky Cannabis Freedom Coalition and creator. All right, we're here to discuss Governor Beshears' executive order. I'm going to let each one of everybody introduce themselves. Representative Carney.
Thanks, Patrick. Good evening, everybody. I'm State Representative Nima Kulkarni. I represent District 40 in Louisville.
Okay. All right. And Kunga.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Kungo Jaguna. I'm a policy strategist with the ACLU of Kentucky, and I actually reside in Representative Kulkarni's district.
All right. And Kunga, you have a disclaimer you would like to read real quick?
I'm fine. It's fine.
Oh, you're good? Okay. All right. And Kristen. Kristen, can you hear me? Let's see here. All right, hold on. Let's see here. I think we've lost.
Matt, can you hear me? Kristen can't get on. She wants you to invite her again.
I got her on. Okay, Julia, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, hi, I'm Julie Cantwell, and I'm with Kentucky Moms for Medical Cannabis, and we're just here trying to look out for Kentucky patients and make sure that they get safe access to medical cannabis.
And Kristen. I don't think she can hear us. Okay, we'll come back. Let's see here. And CJ.
Good evening, everyone. My name is CJ Carter. I'm the Kentucky State Director of Minorities for Medical Marijuana. I'm very blessed to be here on this call, and I'm looking forward to us collaborating and building from here.
Perfect. All right, and Grace. You want to introduce yourself? I can't hear you, Grace. Let's see here. Let's see here. Let's see here. Let's see if I can unmute you.
Hi.
Hi, Grace.
I'm Grace Henderson. I'm one of the directors on Kentucky Cannabis Freedom Coalition Board, as well as the Kentucky Normal Board.
Very good. All right. So basically what we're going to do is we're just going to ask a couple of questions. We've gathered our questions. I'm going to allow Kentucky moms to go ahead and ask the first question. All right. Go ahead, please, ma'am. Julie. Can you hear me? Okay.
Pat, can you hear me? Kristen has the questions with her, so she's going to have to be the ones to ask. I'm sorry about that. I don't have a copy in front of me.
That's perfectly fine. Okay.
Let me see if I can get her on. Hang on a second.
All right. Matthew, you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Sure. I'm Matthew Bratcher with Kentucky chapter for the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. I'm the executive director. So I guess, well, I wasn't nearly as prepared as everybody else because I was waiting to see what everybody else would ask first. So I'll just go ahead and start and just ask real quick. So say a law enforcement officer doesn't want to abide by the executive order. What, if any, repercussions will that officer have?
And that could be for any, it could be for Kunga or Representative Carney, whoever.
I'll go first because Kungo, I can tell you don't want to. So I will say that, the executive order that was issued is not comprehensive. It has resulted in a lot more questions of a practical nature, just like you asked, Matthew. It does not really talk about law enforcement or their role at all. So all it really lays out is the conditions, the 21 conditions that would be covered under the executive order. It talks about caregivers and, some sort of a certification, but there are no details, and certainly nothing is detailed about repercussions for any law enforcement officer that, as you say, doesn't want to abide by this executive order. I think it's important from the outset to set up what this executive order is. It is about the pardon power of the executive. So it is not a legalization measure. It is not a decriminalization measure. It is not any kind of an expungement initiative, nothing like that. So it is only utilizing the pardon power of the executive branch of government in Kentucky. That is questionable in terms of, and please, Patrick, stop me if I'm getting into other folks' questions, but I think it's important to understand the legal, specificity of the executive order and where this power of the pardon comes from. So pardons are usually issued, after somebody has been accused, but before conviction. So if someone's been convicted, then you're talking about expungements. And so it's not clear whether this is something where someone has to go through the entire judicial process. So they get arrested, they go through the court system, and then you bring up this pardon that's outlined in this executive order, or is this a prospective pardon that law enforcement is going to be trained to say if somebody is carrying a card or some certification or a letter, you have to just not even arrest them. So they don't even go into the criminal justice system. None of those questions are answered, unfortunately, in the executive order itself, or as far as I know, in any of the follow-up questions, or any other statements that have been issued. So as of now, how and whether law enforcement abides by this particular executive order, the language that was presented in the document itself, is not at all clear, and there are no provisions in that executive order themselves on how they're going to address law enforcement moving forward.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Kristen, can you hear us? I still don't think we can hear you. Hold on a second. See here. Yeah. See here. See if we can unmute Kristen real quick. See here. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and let Kristen, can you hear?
Hello. Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, very good. Can you introduce yourself and ask your question?
Hello, I'm Kristen Wilcox with Kentucky Moms for Medical Cannabis. I am happy to be here with y'all tonight, and I do have some questions, several actually, but let me pick one. How long is the doctor's signed and dated statement good? Is this something that a doctor would need to sign and date before each visit, or each time they go out of town to get their medicine? Or is one that's been signed and dated, could it potentially last forever?
I can start. I appreciate you taking the first question, Representative Kulkarni. I think this goes back to what Representative Kulkarni was saying earlier in terms of this executive order has a lot to be more questions than answered. Clearly, it reads it just has to be a signed written document. It doesn't address the specifics of what you say. So just based on the plain language of it, it would seem that you would just need what it states, and there is no time frame on it.
Right. Thank you. I just wanted to make that clear, or be clear on that.
And I'll just add, I mean, I've got the executive order pulled up in front of me. There's just 5 things that the certification itself needs to contain, which is the name, date of birth, home address, and telephone number of the patient, the healthcare provider's name, address, telephone number, and their license number, a statement that the healthcare provider, that they have a relationship with the patient. So there's a doctor-patient relationship. And I'm assuming that this is just a written statement, like this person is my patient. And then that they have one of these conditions that's listed in the executive order. So there's nothing about a date, expiration. It's just the date of, but there's no expiration on that certification itself. It doesn't say anything about it being notarized or witnessed. or anything, what the format of this looks like. So it just says certification. And really, it's just the doctor saying, this person is my patient, and they have one of these 21 listed conditions. So as of now, that's all we know about what that certification is supposed to look like.
Okay.
Okay. All right, Grace.
Yes.
And you can, whoever
Do you want me to ask a question?
Yeah, ask it to
Okay.
Representative Carney or Kunga.
Okay. Okay, this is from KCFC member Angela Cooney. And she says, do we know if this bill will protect employees? Say if my doctor approves me, but my job has a strict drug testing policy, will there be anything to protect my job put into place? Now, I do know that there's not a bill number involved, but maybe you know if the executive order will give some kind of protection.
Again, I would say the executive order just doesn't address that situation. It literally just says the governor, under my pardon power, if you meet these specific things, you are pardoned from the offense of possession of marijuana. That is all it does. It doesn't reach out into employment or other things. It just doesn't address that.
And I'll just add to that, you know, one of the things that is really crucial for people to understand about this executive order, again, it's a pardon power. So if you go through the entire judicial process, so if you get arrested, you go through the court system, we don't know if this executive order will be upheld in court. That's not been tested. So a judge could just throw it out and say, this isn't a valid pardon, like this doesn't address the situation in front of us now. And you would then be convicted of possession because it's illegal, right? As of now in statute. So, and you may also tack on to that transporting cannabis across state lines, like whatever the charges may be. It's important because Kentucky doesn't have a, ban the box situation so for employers, if this does just go through the normal court process and you get a conviction, you are, it's on your record. So in terms of employment, and certainly if there's a drug testing policy for employers, that is up to the employer. So I don't believe that the state can just say you can't do that anymore. Even in states where it's legal, whether for full, adult use or for medical, it's up to the employer whether or not they test, how often, and what they do with those results. So I doubt that anything in this executive order, even if it's upheld as written, is going to impact a private employer's decision making in terms of cannabis use in their employees. And I'll say a disclaimer: I'm an attorney, but this is not legal advice.
Okay, CJ.
If I could,
Go ahead.
if I could just add on to that really quickly, is that a lot of it because Kentucky is a right to work state?
No, that just has to do with the rights of an employer on determining who they want to hire. You can't, the state can't mandate that they have to hire somebody or not. They can incentivize folks, to hire like second chance employment and things like that, but they can't mandate, who hires who.
Thank you.
CJ?
Yeah, so just for clarity purposes, there has been no modification of the criminal status of marijuana. So there are no protections is what I'm hearing that are offered to potential patients.
Correct. As Rep. Carney said, the legislature sets what is lawful or unlawful. It is still against the law to possess marijuana. The governor is just using his pardon power that he has under our state constitution, section 77, to pardon people from crimes. So it is still very much unlawful. So you can still very much get arrested. And then you would have to say, I fit this executive order and these charges should be dismissed against me, and invoke that pardon.
So yeah, that's a huge misconception because a lot of people don't understand that the way you just explained it. But I guess my first question is this is a this is about access to medical marijuana, and I know that in order to actually get access to medical marijuana, you have to go to either Illinois or Michigan. But does the governor have plans of pursuing reciprocity from Ohio, from Tennessee, or I'm not Tennessee, but from the surrounding states that do have a medical program where it states that you have to be a citizen of those states to actually get medical marijuana? So is reciprocity a part of the governor's plan, or is that even included in the executive order?
The executive order is silent as to that, and I don't know what the governor's plans are.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that, that I believe it's Ohio has already said that there is no reciprocity agreement that they can enter into. There are several states. So right now it's just Illinois, because all the other states you have to be a resident, you have to have whatever their medical registration is, to be able to purchase cannabis in those states. So Illinois is, full recreational. And so that's the only state where possibly a person could go purchase, cannabis and then risk, again, we're still risking criminal statutes, driving it across state lines into Kentucky.
So it's fair to say that the governor, he didn't add any meat and potatoes per se to this conversation. This is kind of something that it's kind of disheartening, because I thought a lot more was included in the executive order, but by the sounds of it, this isn't quite anything. It seems like this is more of a chess move that the governor is playing with the legislator just to move the conversation forward. Is it fair to say that?
I'll take that, Congo. I mean, I'm not going to comment on political chess moves or anything like that. I will say that, personally, just as a policymaker, I'm a little disappointed because all of this conversation started when President Biden made that proclamation saying he is pardoning federal level offenses, which there's not that many, right, for simple possession on a federal level. But he directed governors to use their pardon power to address state level convictions and use his pardon power to do that. He directed them to use whatever measures they had at their disposal for either pardoning, for expanding expungement, for essentially moving forward decriminalization efforts. And my concern at this point is that the distractions that this executive order has created in terms of just, is this constitutional? How far does it go? Does it actually do anything? Has now shifted the focus from decriminalization efforts that a lot of folks on this call have been advocating for years, and has moved it into what is the viability of this, just couple page document. And that is, I think, a missed opportunity by the executive, because there is a lot that they could do on decriminalization measures that are not even contemplated or discussed around this executive order in particular.
So yeah, just a real quick question for everybody on the call. Was anybody on the governor's executive team who he had assembled travel the state? Were any of us included in that?
Julie Cantwell and Kristen Wilcox were.
I just want to follow up on Rep. Carney's comments that, after President Biden did his pardon, we signed on to a letter with her and other organizations asking our governor to do that here. We know that if he had done that, that would help tens of thousands of Kentuckians. And I'll just say, we call on him to do that, to issue an executive order that does that. He has the clear authority to do that today, and I would call on him to do that.
Yeah, right. Decriminalize it for all Kentuckians.
Mm-hmm.
All right, what I would say is it's a pardon again, so he can't decriminalize.
Right, exactly.
So,
Okay.
Prior offenses, yeah.
Right. Okay, so Matthew had a question. He raised his hand. Matthew?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to add, I know we do have very limited sources for being able to have access to cannabis. Missouri has just recently opened up. I think there'll be a recreational state first of the year, and Virginia as well. So it's coming to us really close. It's coming all on all our corners here. So that's a good step. Speaking of moving forward, I was looking at some of the stats that was found, and over 56,000 cannabis convictions in the past 6 years. That's quite a lot. Uh, so what steps are being taken on the legislative side to help provide a little bit of judicial relief for those people, since this isn't something within the purview of this particular executive order? And I guess that would be a question specifically for Representative Kulkarni to address the legislative actions.
Yeah, and I would like also Kungo to mention, talk about some of the disparities and things like that, because there hasn't really been any movement forward to address any of that. And I know that our Black Legislative Caucus, several members for several years, have tried to address parts of that. So they've tried to address expungement costs, for example. I know Rep. Brown has introduced the ban the box for employment purposes for several years. None of those have moved forward at all. I don't even know if I think there might have been a committee hearing here or there, but nothing comprehensively addressing the decriminalization question that you're basically asking, because you're talking about tens of thousands of people that have been convicted for simple possession. Again, we're not talking about the threshold, for instance, in the executive order, it says 8 ounces. And that is for purposes of trafficking. That's the number, right? So simple possession falls well below that. And so you're talking about people that have convictions for simple possession decades ago. It's still on their record. You've got folks that have convictions for paraphernalia when drugs weren't even around. That's tens of thousands of people. You've got people who are unable to get employment, who are unable to find housing. And this is exactly what President Biden was directing governors to address. And so there has not been legislation. I've got a bill for decriminalizing that addresses all of that. And I'm hoping, if we move forward in Kentucky with legalization, which I'm differentiating, legalization would be for medical or for full adult use, does not necessarily mean decriminalization is just automatically included in any of that. So if there's a legalization bill that moves forward, I'm hopeful we can roll in some of these decriminalization provisions, because it's not fair. It's just fundamentally unfair for Kentucky to create an entire cannabis industry for some people who may have access to loans to start a business, for instance, who may have the ability to get a license to dispense this medication or grow it. And yet you have people that may still be behind bars, who are still facing charges, or who have this stuff on their record and cannot afford a $500 expungement application fee. That is fundamentally unfair. And I'm concerned, again, by this executive order's focus on just medical cannabis, which is sorely needed, absolutely needed. But that we are focusing on a very narrow, because of, polling. It polls well. Everyone's for it. Like 99% of Kentucky is for it. And that's fine. But there are a lot of people it would be leaving out if we don't also address the, again, disparities, the historic and racial disparities that have existed in the war on drugs, and, that some folks are still dealing with, a lot of folks are dealing with in Kentucky as we speak.
Okay.
Oh
I
yeah.
agree with everything that she says, and specifically with the disparities. Obviously, the ACLU of Kentucky is an organization that clearly says we want to end the war on drugs. We know that on a national level that African Americans are 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana charges, and in Kentucky, that is upwards of 10 times more likely. So clearly, this is a racial equity issue, and that's why we need to address it. But I also want to talk about something that Representative Kulkarni mentioned in terms of the drug paraphernalia charges. The executive order doesn't talk about that. So you can have the marijuana, but if you also have the tools you use to consume it, you can be charged for drug paraphernalia, and the pardon does not cover that.
Oh, that's a good point. That's something that a lot of people probably wouldn't have thought about, is because they do have a tendency to stack the charges when they get a chance to charge you. And you know, and I agree wholeheartedly. I think when we do address medical, it goes hand in hand with DCRIM. You see it in how it has worked in other states, and they always kind of come together. You know, get passed around the same and focus on the same thing. So I'm glad to see that somebody's working on getting some of that done in our legislature. And thank you so much for answering my question.
All right, Kristen.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, can.
Okay. As part of the governor's medical cannabis advisory committee, I just first want to say that even though this order doesn't go far enough, I would like to say that I am grateful that the governor did something here. I think that his order is very broad in nature. And at first I really questioned that, but I think as attorneys, even maybe some of you you may be able to understand why he left some of this broad. I had to look for the reason, but I think that reasons that he left some of these big giant loopholes was to be able to give some of these attorneys ways to fight, because the more defined, the more arguable a defense is. But I think by leaving these loopholes open, maybe it would give lawmakers, or give people a rebuttal for these charges. Maybe attorneys might be able to fight better for them. But also, I really just wanted to say too, Nima, you've mentioned a couple times that the whether or not the order stands. Are you hearing that this could be overturned, in the legislature? And what would be the route to do that? And also, I don't know, are you talking to the governor and his administration about things that you think he could still do in this?
So, yeah, and thank you for that question. So I mentioned the the sort of tentative nature of the executive order because it's not in statute, right? So statutes are statutes; they can't simply be overturned. And the real test of this is going to be on a case-by-case basis. So if the Kentuckian who has this certification in hand from their physician is diagnosed with one of these conditions, 21 conditions. Again, we don't know if there needs to be supplemental medical documentation that needs to go with it. Like, none of that is addressed in the executive order. So if you drive across state lines, you purchase 7.9 ounces and you drive back and you're arrested, right? That's when all of this starts. That's when all of this starts, and the person can say, look, I have the certification. This is to an officer. So don't arrest me. The officer may or may not know what they're talking about, depending on where in the state, depending on if has there been training, because this is going into effect in January. So Kentuckians may be relying on this starting January 1st. But none of these questions have been answered. And certainly that's not enough time for every law enforcement officer to be trained on what they should and shouldn't be doing. But this is going to be tested on a case-by-case basis in different courts in different counties throughout Kentucky by different judges. So that's the concern. And there is a constitutional concern about, does the governor have the authority to basically say anything about medical cannabis Or is that the legislature's job? So there's a separation of powers issue, maybe there is an interpretation of the pardon power of the executive that we don't know yet, that will be tested by a judge. And so we just don't know what that pardon power is because it's never been done before, right? So pardoning people for, however many tens of thousands for past offenses, that is within the pardon power of the governor, of the executive. That's done, right? And this is something that we're talking about, kind of a blanket forward-looking pardon
Right.
for somebody that, finds themselves in this situation after they've crossed state lines with cannabis that they purchased somewhere else. So the answer is I don't know, but it is not at all on solid ground, on solid legal ground until a judge, and really not just a judge, really until the Supreme Court says this is a solid executive order and this is how it's going to be applied. And that's not going to happen by January 1st. And so I think we just need to be aware of that and mindful before people start acting on it.
So can I ask a question? So you said it was like a $500 expungement fee. Did I hear you say that right?
Yeah, I believe so. Or has that been reduced?
Has that been
Yeah,
reduced?
it's been reduced.
Okay,
That's-
it's been reduced. Sorry.
Okay. All right. So Kristen, were you good? Okay.
I think so. I'm still hopeful that good attorneys will be able to use the loopholes left by the governor in this order in a way that will allow them to fight for pardons to get people out of this. I'm hopeful. I know that this order will still help some of the people, some of our children we don't have time to waste. And these are good law-abiding citizens that really just, have no other choice. With children, you don't want to lose your children. But yeah, I think so. And I'm very hopeful that this year too, that we can forget this executive order and just have the legislature do their job for once. That would be great.
Right.
I will follow that up with, I think as Rep. Kulkarni said, it's we don't know the full extent of the pardon power. There is some case law that suggests that the pardon power is pretty broad. But this specific instance, we just don't know. So people should be careful if they want to start acting under this. In terms of the legislative session, I mean, as we know, the way that politics sometimes work, I attended a dinner that GLI put on, and we had the Speaker of the House, Speaker Osborne, and President Stivers there, and this issue came up. But based on their comments, it didn't sound like anything around this issue would move. But obviously we're a democracy. People should lobby their legislators, let them know how they feel. If people in this group live in those districts, say, hey, I am a constituent and this concerns me and this is what I want, and I would like you to at least let people vote on it.
Right. Grace.
All right. This one, this is from KCFC member Matt Atkin. And the question is, will there be possibilities for amending the executive order to include other possible conditions such as depression and anxiety?
I think when the governor, at least from his press conference, I think he was actually pretty clear that he was open to changing it if the need arose.
Okay. All right.
I just want that out there. Thank you.
CJ.
Yeah, real quick. Can you guys speak to the actual legality of the executive order? And have you seen or do you know of any lawsuits that are going to be put in place to challenge the executive order?
I don't know of any lawsuits. I wouldn't speculate on, the legality of it. Like I said, there is some case law to suggest he has this broad power, but ultimately the specific facts of the case before the court would decide whether a court said, you know what, we think section 77 speaks for itself and he has unlimited power to pardon and he can set the conditions for that. The only exception is for cases of impeachment. I'm not aware. I believe the attorney general for the state made a statement at the time, questioning it. Whether or not his office decides to challenge it is speculation at this point.
Agreed. I think the main thing that we need to remember is that this is a very specific instance and it's just been untested. And so it's difficult to speculate on the legality, because how we'll find out is when someone gets arrested and goes through this process in court.
So there are no roadblocks having this legal January 3rd when it's supposed to be legal. It's going to happen. Is what it's sounding like.
Well, the executive order becomes effective.
Right.
I caution people to use the word legal. I think that's why we keep saying it's the pardon power. And by definition, when I ever pardon someone, it's because typically someone's been charged and or convicted of a crime. So it's very much still illegal to possess with marijuana, cannabis in this state. And the governor is granting a prospective pardon to conduct that has not yet happened. And that is an open question of law under our Constitution, whether or not the pardon power covers that conduct.
You good, CJ? Okay. All right. Two things. One, we got 30 more minutes, and Julia Cantwell wants to say a question. Wants to say something. Julia.
I have to unmute. I'm sorry about that. I just have a question. So, most of our patients are sick and can't travel out of state to get what they need. So they're going to need caregivers to do it for them. So my question is about caregivers. I just wanted to know if you know what kind of documentation is needed for a caregiver do they need a written documentation or something other than that? And also, does the patient have to be in a vehicle with the caregiver whenever they do go to purchase their medical cannabis from out of state? And would the pre-pardon extend over to the caregiver if the patient is not in the car or in the car or not? Either one. So there.
So as far as I can see in the executive order document, right, itself, there's nothing about the caregiver having to be in the same vehicle as the patient that has been diagnosed. It just needs to be part of the certification, right? So that the patient themselves has to say that this person is my caregiver, and the caregiver themselves have to be 21, at least 21 years old. So that has to be the main thing.
Okay, so if the caregiver is coming back from, say, Illinois, and they don't have the patient with them, they just have to have that piece of paper that says that they're a caregiver, basically?
As far as the text of the executive order.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
I would agree with that. And just if you're the caregiver, you probably want that I'm the caregiver for this individual, and have that individual's letter from the doctor that says they are eligible for, have one of the conditions, is what I would do.
Thank you.
Okay. Matthew or Lauren? I see Lauren's here.
Hi. Yeah, I think she's just listening on the call. I think we've covered a lot of, where this really fits in and how far it goes and where it doesn't go. At this point, I don't have any more questions. I know we've got a lot more to go. We got to see how judicial review will see this, and we'll probably have our first test of it the next couple of months, at least at the lower courts. But I don't think I have any more questions from our end of things. So and
Okay.
leave my time.
Just hang out. Okay, Grace.
Most of the questions that I have been answered in some way or another, but just that this is also clarified. This is from KCFC member Amy Catt. And the question is, does the executive order prevent arrests or only pardon them after the fact?
You just
I
answered.
would say it does not prevent an officer from arresting you.
Thank you.
Okay. CJ?
Yeah, so we know that the legislator and the governor are kind of in opposition to each other. Do you guys see the governor and the legislator coming together to actually form a viable medical program? Is the first question. And then is this considered revenue generating? Because I know in short sessions, revenue generating legislation is not often passed. Where do you guys see the actual possibility of the passage of potential legislation between the governor and the legislator?
So I'll just start by saying that if we're going to create a legalization framework in Kentucky, it has to be done through the legislature. There's no need for the governor, just in a kind of constitutional level. So whatever, and that is because of, the regulation, taxation, just administration. Is this going to be, what department is this going to fall under? Who's going to be issuing licenses, registration cards? Like, what are the conditions? Like, all of this stuff is not going to be, and is not, for that reason, covered in an executive order, because it's not a statute. It's not full legislation. So I don't know that they will work with the governor. I do know that there has been movement, forward in the majority party caucus on this issue. And I think that those mainly driven by constituents, right? Everyone in every county is contacting the representatives and senators and saying, this is how we feel. Now, if you don't want to represent us, then it's up to them to vote these folks out or vote people in or whatever they want to do. That's an electoral issue. There is, again, no reason for folks to work with the governor, but I will say that this medical cannabis issue specifically is something that I mean, will have the, probably most forward momentum at this point, just because of that advisory board, is advisory board, Julie and Kristen, or advisory task force. So, because of just all of the stories that folks have heard, we know how desperately needed this is. And it's just a question of like, which conditions, how is this going to work? What does a registration look like? Who gets to grow it? Who gets to distribute it? What does it all look like? The nuts and bolts of it. I do not believe that because of the medical nature of it, I do not believe that it will be taxed for revenue purposes, because it's medicine. And so we're not looking at it as a revenue generating scheme if we're just looking at medical cannabis becoming legalized in Kentucky. That will be, more of a full recreational use or full adult use measure, which is a whole other sort of can of worms. But again, I'm always going to advocate for including decriminalization provisions in either of those legalization frameworks, whether we tax it or not. We've got to make sure everybody is a part of this new industry, this brave new world, on equal footing.
You good, CJ? Perfect. Kristen?
I just want to say that Kentucky Moms for Medical Cannabis has finally seen the light. We for years and years past, we've only worked towards medical bills, but we absolutely, year after year, our medical bills keep getting chopped, the best parts of them stripped away. And I just want to say publicly that we agree with you that Decriminalization is a huge part of this issue. If we don't pass a good medical bill, we still leave 3/4 or more of our the patients we represent criminalized. And so I'm proud to say publicly that we this year are going to flip the script, and we are going to fight with you all for decriminalization. I'm very proud of that, and proud of the work that you've all done on this issue. As for questions, I have a couple more, silly, but I'm going to ask them anyway. One of the questions I think all of us collectively came up with in conversation ahead of this meeting was about carpooling. Has anybody asked that yet? I wasn't here. Okay. I had trouble getting on from the start, but with carpooling, what if, we have potentially 4 patients who carpool together to Illinois, and they have their 32 ounces coming back. How is that? I guess, how's that going to look?
Yeah.
I worry, but the same, not only with this and the amount wise, but I also am concerned, and this kind of goes along with that. Many have brought to our attention that if you go, let's say you go to Illinois, I think that non-residents are only allowed to purchase so much per transaction. So if we have a patient who's trying to get the maximum, if they come from Eastern Kentucky, they're wanting to get the maximum amount. So we'll have all these different packages in the same vehicle, even though we're well within the 8 ounce limit. It kind of starts to blur those lines and look like it could be a trafficking cause. So I'm concerned about that. So if y'all could speak on that, I'd appreciate it.
One, thank you for joining the advocacy for decrim. Very much appreciated. I think, one, there are no silly questions. And you bring up a good fact scenario, quite frankly. It's almost like a fact pattern for us lawyers, because there is something known as constructive possession. And when I was a prosecutor, there'd be one, say the marijuana is in the center console, everyone's saying it's not theirs. Officer charges everyone constructive possession. So those are some issues. I would hope that if everybody had their paperwork in order, it could clearly be that, this is mine, but it is a scenario that could happen. That is a real thing. And someone could just say, maybe they don't believe it, and just charge everybody and say, you all possess the 32 ounces. You're now over the 8 ounce delineation for trafficking, and charge everybody in the car for trafficking. That is a real fear.
I agree. And I will say it's exactly a law school scenario. And it's a test case. Like this could happen, right? Because as you mentioned, not everyone can just pick up and drive across state lines. They may have to pick up cannabis for medical purposes for several people at one time, just for efficiency's sake, because you have a caregiver, everyone, like these are just practical concerns that will come up. And it's not at all clear, a lot of the onus here is on law enforcement, on just how are they going to interpret any given scenario. It's something that is very unclear, and it is concerning. I mean, it should be concerning to everybody involved, including officers who will not be sure what is coming across state lines and what to charge people with. County attorneys, like, what are they going to it is very unclear, because even if you have all the documentation, if you have 3 different packages, adding up to 8, and what if everyone's a family member? What if there are multiple people in one family with different medical conditions that all fall under this executive order? I mean, we could speculate for hours, endlessly on any given scenario, but the fact is that none of that is answered by the executive order. And this what we're talking about here is going to be tested on a case-by-case basis in the courts. And that's really how we're going to figure it out until we get a full, something on the books in statute.
May I add something to that? May I add something?
Sure.
Right. Basically, what I would say to anybody, if you're going to be transporting it across state lines, if you're within the legal limit, put it in a safe lockbox in the back seat in the trunk of your car where it's not reachable. Right. So and obey the traffic laws. Just be
Make sure you have a receipt.
and make sure you have the
for
receipt for each one of
thing.
them. I mean, I think that would be appropriate because it's in a locked box. Does that make sense, Kunga? Am I Arnina?
I'm not going to give specific legal advice. That's where people should consult counsel. But what I will say is this, and Representative Kulkarni just talked about it. What the pardon is for a misdemeanor. And so these cases will come to your local county attorney, who is an elected official. So you all should be speaking with your local county attorney, because that county attorney could say, I'm not prosecuting these, if my officers arrest these individuals, we're not going to prosecute. For example, here in Jefferson County, the office of Michael Connell years ago with the ACLU and other community groups said, if you have 2 ounces or less, we're not prosecuting those offenses. And the officers responded, and they don't charge and arrest people for that. So one of the things is go to your county attorney, speak to him or her and say, well, how are you going to handle this?
I think that's really good advice, because it is going to differ county by county. Frankly, you may have some folks that are like, this is just unclear. I don't know if it's valid. I'm just gonna ignore it. So it's gonna be business as usual. And so you're gonna be charged and prosecuted, per the statutes on the books, what the law is currently. So Patrick, to your point, I think it's a little dangerous to say if you're within the legal amount, because there is no legal amount. There is no legal amount of cannabis that you can possess in Kentucky right now, regardless of this executive order. And certainly there's not any legal amount you can transport across state lines because of federal law. So, once you're back in Kentucky, it's up to our police officers and it's up to our courts and our prosecutors on how it's going to proceed, whether it's in a locked box, whether it's not. That's really where we are. So I wouldn't say anything. There's no safe, practical way to do any of this, because there's just too much uncertainty, legal uncertainty.
Gotcha. Okay, real quick, we got 15 minutes, Grace.
I do have a question, and you might not know the answer to this, and if you don't, that's okay, but maybe we can start kind of mulling it over and get back to it another time. But my question is, can a pre-pardoned patient also assign a caregiver? And if so, what would keep patients from assigning a caregiver role to a medical marijuana patient in another state? Like, would this be a way to not only have to deal with full rec states?
So I'm just trying to understand, are you saying that somebody in Kentucky falls under this executive order? So they've been diagnosed with one of the 21 conditions. They have somebody, a relative or just a friend or somebody, that they are saying is a caregiver. So they don't live in Kentucky, but the patient is saying that this person is a caregiver, and the caregiver lives in a state where medical cannabis is legal. Is that the scenario?
Yeah.
So you're saying, is it possible then to essentially have that pipeline open?
Well, as someone who I qualify as a
That's
patient.
a dangerous word. I shouldn't have used that word, but you know what I mean.
I do, yeah. But as someone who qualifies as a patient, I wonder if I would also be able to assign a caregiver for the times that I can't make the trip.
It's unclear because it's basically going to be whatever's written on that piece of paper or card or whatever it looks like. So as of the text again of the executive order, it just says the patient is just saying this person is my caregiver.
There
Thank
is some defining that who has significant responsibility for managing the well-being of the individual. So I think you could have some issues with whether or not someone fits that kind of definition.
If they live in another state, yeah.
If I might add to this, in other states, I think that caregiver will have to have their the person that they are providing care for registered with them. So using someone with the caregiver kind of persona would they have to be registered as a caregiver in that medical marijuana state? Probably, but could they put you on it? Being an out-of-state patient, not likely. I'm not sure. That would be something to kind of look into more for sure. But those rules are pretty specific a lot of times when it comes to caregivers. There's always usually a limited number of people they're able to provide care for. Also, we've seen that in our bills that haven't gone through. But in other states, that's definitely the case with some of the ones around us. I just kind of wanted to add that.
Okay. All right, CJ, do you have any questions? More questions?
Yes. Is there any resource that's going to provide clarity to all of the misunderstandings that are around the governor's executive order, where the common layman can go to get his questions answered? I know we're recording this session right now, but are there any resources where people can go to get some clarity?
I am not aware of any ones that are public. No, that I'm aware of.
We're all going to be confused, unfortunately. Well, I guess maybe there's something that we on the call can possibly put together just for people to have some sort of resource, because I know since we all have questions and we're all already involved in the cannabis space, I can only imagine the questions and the concerns that those who aren't involved in the cannabis space would have.
Right.
So I
And
guess
I'll just throw out, I think this is one of those situations where, again, talking to your local officials that will be involved in any of these scenarios, that is a solid way to get local resources. So you know in the county where you live, what will happen to you if you act, relying on this executive order. But it's going to be up to folks to kind of figure that out and navigate those waters themselves, because it does not sound like there's going to be, a handbook or anything like that explaining what exactly will be covered and how, because again, this is going to be decided. If we do not move forward in the legislature with an actual bill that gets passed and signed into law, then we are just looking at case by case, judge by judge, court by court.
May I ask a question? Right, this is for Kunga. Right, are we aware of any attorney generals that are in Kentucky that are actively against this?
You mean county attorneys?
County
Obviously,
attorneys.
the state attorney general who issued a statement.
Yeah.
I don't know the position of those county attorneys. That's why I told people to reach out to their local county attorney, reach out to your local police department, chiefs of police, and speak to them, because those are the people who are going to have everyday real control over how this gets enforced in your county.
Okay. Kristen, do you have another question? We've got about 8 minutes.
Of course I do. No, I just want to tell our patients watching, anybody watching, to be sure to check out the laws in other states that you go to, because we've already established that Kentucky if you fit all the criteria, you can bring back 8 ounces. The problem with that is that you also would need to check the state you're traveling to. So you go to Illinois and a non-resident is only allowed to possess up to 15 grams. So that would be, I don't want to see people go across state lines and say, oh, well, I've got my 8 ounces, I'm fine. You have to be careful getting that back over the state line too, because even in a recreational state such as Illinois, if you possess more than 15 grams, then, it's 15 grams and so much concentrate, but it's, a very limited amount. So I just want to make sure that people pay attention, read up on the laws of the places that you're going to. And I think that a lot of these questions can be answered. The simpler questions can be answered simply by reading the bill, but we definitely have to encourage people to still be careful. We don't want anybody criminalized for this. But if they are, and I hope that this causes such a mess that the legislature is forced to act. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Grace, do you have any other questions?
No, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who took the time to be here tonight. I really appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have any other questions before we call it?
Yeah, I have a question to Representative Carney. Do you know of any legislation that will be introduced this session regarding decriminalization or medical marijuana? I know that you have your bills, but are there any other that are up to be introduced?
Yeah, I want you to
Not
talk about your
that
bills.
Oh, sorry, Patrick, what was that?
I would like you to talk about your bills.
Yes. Not that I'm aware of. So I've got 2 bills and I've filed them before. One is decriminalizing cannabis, again, simple possession, 21 and over, regardless of, it's not limited to any medical conditions or anything like that. Includes paraphernalia, has some expungement statutes. The second bill is a ballot measure. So it would basically just put that same question. Do you, as a Kentuckian, want to decriminalize possession of cannabis for adults 21 and over, up to, I think it's an ounce. So it's not the 8 ounce threshold that we're talking about. And I believe that also addresses personal use quantity, but then also home grow. So it allows for growing your own, I think up to 5 plants or something like that. So that those are going to be reintroduced. I do not know of any other bills that will be introduced. I mean, I know that Rep. Nemes has his medical cannabis bill, and he has, worked to move that forward in the Senate as well. So I'm not sure if that's going to be filed. We changed our pre-filing sort of process in the legislature, because it used to be you would already know who's filing what and be able to comment on it, but that's changed. So we're probably all just sort of waiting anxiously for January 3rd, when we will find out for sure which cannabis related bills have been filed for this session.
Perfect.
For those of us who work in the general or who work up there in lobby, like my organization, that them changing the pre-filing has made it more difficult. And I think Nemes has come out and said that he does not intend to file his bill in the House, that it needs to start in the Senate. And I think there was an article that indicated that maybe Senator West and some people over there might be filing something over in the Senate, but again, we won't know until something's actually filed.
Kristen, did you have anything else you want to add, or Julie?
Talk to Julie.
Julie?
Yeah, I'm just patiently listening. I do believe that there will be a Senate bill coming out that will be very similar to House Bill 136, and I'm looking forward to that, and I'm really hoping that it will help our patients. And that's pretty much all I've got to add. Thank you guys for allowing us to be here.
Yes, thank y'all for including us.
Well, you're welcome. Representative Kakari, I want to say thank you, and Kunga, I want to say thank you as well for your lobbying for our decrim bill. All right, 2023 is going to be an exciting session. All right, if you want to see the bill, you can go to legalizekentucky.org. It's an amendment to the Kentucky Constitution. It's only 3 pages long. It's not hard, right? We need, and I'm also going to add, right, that we are going to have a rally on January the 3rd at 11 o'clock, from 11 to 12, right? We want everybody in the rotunda in Frankfurt. We want everybody and their brother there, right? Everyone there, right? We want everyone's voice to be heard. We're going to be partnering with Kentucky Normal. They're going to help us do an email blast to our Kentucky legislators on that day. Thank you, Lauren. And with that, you all have a wonderful night, and I appreciate your all's participation.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for
Hope we
having
answered
us.
your questions.
Dov, good night. Thank you.
Good night.